again this afternoon. Very happy to have you with us. Now, this afternoon, my name is Robin Loon. I'm the provocateur for this session, which means that I'll be moderating. Gives me great pleasure to just introduce and invite the four speakers for today's round table to take their seats. Firstly, JAE LEE KIM, YINAN, UGORAN, and TZU NYEN. The topic today is the political in the arts. There will be on-the-spot interpretation of the speeches in both English and in Japanese, for those of you who require it. So I propose that what we do today is we will invite the speakers to talk about their experiences vis-a-vis this topic, and then we'll leave the last 30 to 45 minutes for question and answer from the floor. So we'll start with JAE LEE KIM.
Thank you. I'm JAE LEE KIM from South Korea. I have worked as a dramaturg in Korean National Contemporary Dance Company, and now I'm working as an independent dramaturg in only South Korea. So this is a great opportunity for me to share my idea and thoughts, so almost from my dramaturgical experience. So, okay. I'm pretty nervous, the first speaker in here. So, okay. Thank you. I'm going to present one of my projects of dramaturg. In the last 5 years, I had many opportunities to involve artist process as a dramaturg. Dramaturgy or dramaturgy is still new concept in South Korea still. But some institution and independent choreographer went to inviting the dramaturg to their artist process. I mostly collaborate with some artists. They're from contemporary dance and performing art. So they have very strong political questions. It's from all this contemporary dance. From this questioning the politics, and they rethinking about the process of art working and the choreography and the new form of art. In the field of art today, the politics and arts is very closely connected, I think. I believe that we are all these witness in this kind of phenomenon. So I would like to introduce one of my work. It's considered as critical art in relationship between the institution and body and dance. This piece is meaningful for me, and because it is example the young generation within Korean context. They're presenting their political stance, yeah? And as a choreographer, and then they upholding the criticism about the institution and tradition also, and education. So it's all from the context of Korea history. So the title is Glory. I'm going to present the piece of Glory. So I'm going to read all this interpretation and background. So. Glory is about how institution manages and control the body by intersecting Korean military service and the dance competition. In the last 60 years, after the Korean War, every male over 18 years old and more must serve in the military in Korea. In the dance field, if a male dancer gets the first prize in the certain dance competition, and they're gonna be released from the obligatory military service. The choreographer in Glory observed this situation for quite a long time and explored how social institutions control bodies, and then again how this affect the current trend of dance. Glory is not about the personal work arising from the Korean context, but also connected to the criticism of modernity in contemporary art. The criticism of modernity, such as human alienation and moralization and the control of the body, have been discussed in both postmodern dance and contemporary dance. However, the reality of dancing inside the institutional system nowadays is contrary to this kind of the critique. Glory asks the question whether the body and dance can be subjective in our society. Through the territorial issues stemming from Korean Peninsula division and the nation-established military systems, all males are controlled within the territorial command and evidence that each choose their freedom for about 2 years. Glory focuses on the paradox between the soldier who live for the glory for protecting their country and the dancer, they are seeking the glory to escape from it. Can an individual or even an art form be politically independent in this situation? Those may question in this piece. In this piece, the dramaturg's main task was considered not only the piece itself, but also research to enlarge the institution on a social dimension. I proposed the former concept of choreographic documentary. Everyone familiar with the concept? I just used these words. I don't know. I made it up or somebody used these concepts already. So, choreographic documentary means to create the mechanism of a performance based on the real documents. We collect the data by interviewing the dancer who had been victorious or unsuccessful in competition. We have traced their physical experience in order to establish the structure of the choreography. My main focusing is not directly dramaturgical work. I'm just expanded the choreography. We just walking in process of the choreography. So what is critical here? Specify the main medium of choreography, focusing on the body, activity, and the physical aspect of thought. This because purpose of the work of critical attitude was not limited to criticize institution, but also included development into the art form, the whole on the aesthetic attitude of dance. I think this is a political artist, just you mentioned before, just thinking about the political artist and then activist is a little bit different from the perspective of aesthetic. Yeah? So the choreographer are quite interested in the process of the choreography rather than just asking some question about the political. So before I go further, I just show a little clip, the video clip, how it looks like.
Tous les hommes, dès lors qu'ils atteignent l'âge de 18 ans. Cependant, dans le milieu de la danse, il existe un moyen d'être exempté par le biais d'une compétition.
This piece has premiere in Dance Lodge in France,
Le
so we
danseur
speak
qui
a
remporte le
little
premier prix
French and
se
in
voit
English,
offrir
same
une
time the
dispense du
Korean.
service
We mixed
militaire.
all the language for the piece.
En cas d'échec, la durée du service est de 2 ans.
Just show you like
군대에 간다는
2
것은
minutes long.
저에게 무용을 그만둔다는 의미였습니다. 그래서 저는 콩쿠르를 준비하였습니다.
He is a main dancer. It's
저희
kind
여덟
of
번째 콩쿠르
victim of the
끝났을 때
institution in
저희
Korea.
친구는 제게 이렇게 말해주었습니다.
남겨놔, 축하해. 너 2등이야. Pendant 4 ans, il a préparé le concours 8 fois. Pour perdre du poids, il s'est imposé un régime drastique composé exclusivement de tofu, de concombre et de poulet. Il s'est entraîné par des techniques de ballet et a enduré toutes les souffrances nécessaires pour repousser à l'extrême les limites de son corps et de son esprit. Préparation!
The choreographer and I find a lot of in common between the dance movement and the military service kind of training. So we just little
Yeah, yeah.
play with this and then make it some composition
Chassez.
kind of things.
En 2 jambes. Fermé. Pas de chat. En
We're
bas.
using this kind of the term of the ballet.
Rendu.
Yeah. Or
Camouillard.
the emphasizing that this is kind of a dance situation, not military service.
Assemblé. En dedans. Grand battement. Pas de 2.
And the dancer in black, he failed the competition and had experience about the military service in Korea.
Penché. Promenade. Heureux l'homme qui supporte patiemment la tentation.
We just to put some sacred music because it's the pieces, the title is the glory, so we make a little fun of them.
Mise à ce qu'il est. Fondu. Échappé. Hello,
Hello,
how are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
How did
I
it
just
go?
explain about the process, the research and the studio work. We just gathering all the documents from the male dancer, and then we analyze and categorize according to the elements of dance from career and history or institution or political perspective. At the same time, we reflect ourselves through our dance education. We find also a lot of in common the dance competition movement, and from this all education in Korea, it's kind of the choreographer and I have both experience. They went through all the elite dance education, so the training is very hard, and we always mimicking our teachers, and then that piece seems like attacking the traditional the way to teach or attacking directly to our teachers, so that makes little critical issues from them. I think that is enough. This is my dramaturgical reflection. through the process of glory, I quite interesting how we develop the method according to our political questions. The choreographer and I just harsh to criticize some principle and rules from all the power and the power relationship. But more important thing is that how can we actualize the political question on the stage? And how can we use the symbol of the politics as a material source for the choreography? And then how can we produce aesthetic perspective of dance itself? So all the ask the question is thereby as to what is dance today? And our political question made us rethinking about the body, just not only as a subject in society, but also as a main medium of dance. We just thinking about the body, sometimes the subjective and sometimes objective, the same level of the other material. We just play with the body, and and finally it comes subject on the stage. I don't know this dynamic. Is everyone familiar with this, or I don't know. I can be more clear explanation, but still now I'm just confusing of the object and subject kind of situation. So the body of glory is regarded as a place where, okay, I read it again. The body of glory is regarded as a place where society and art exist, and one filled with the struggles among institutions and power, the social mechanism, and even history. One can say, according to this, that revealing the power structure of the social institution through the choreography is a political act by the choreographer. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, JAE Lee. Now we're holding the questions till the end of the session, till we've heard from all four speakers. So thank you very much, JAE Lee. And now it gives me great pleasure to invite UGORAN to take over the presentation.
Thank you for the time. My name is Ugo. I come from Teater Garasi, which I will discuss after this a little bit. Before I begin, I structure my conversation around the sustainability and network of ideas as options for the politics of performance, but just to clarify the position, at this stage, I think artist engagement to the political, like the thing that I think we're going to touch upon during our conversation, that is how they address actual crisis, actual political crisis. That kind of approach, I think it's always going to stay. I think it's going to be a part of theater mode, performance mode of production, because crisis always calls, right? Having said that, I think it's always going to be also part of artist engagement to make visible a certain political crisis, or even further to create a certain political crisis, so that it become like a tools for citizen engagement and so on and so forth. But yes, my conversation today is precisely the current trajectory that I have been working with in my theater collective. The kind of question that we are currently asking around, precisely because I think the background of this inquiry is Indonesian has been living in a different political realm since 1998, to which the democratic sphere seems like apparent, seems like it's a different world compared to the previous Suharto regime era, the 30 years of Suharto regime era, but things has been going around in a different kind of political complexity, so that this kind of question, sustainability and network of ideas, sustainability of ideas and network of ideas, seems like a more pressing concern in our trajectory. In many ways, the kind of conversation around the political art and art as politic, I kind of locate that at least in the trajectory of 25 years or so of our collective, I don't believe that a singular theater production is usually as the most significant or the most effective tools for political engagement. What I mean is that singularity, aesthetic singularity, that I'm not saying that I am against individual characteristic of a performance or a certain uniqueness of a performance, but I kind of, what I mean by singularity is to put a particular aesthetic ideas or discursive ideas as something that is leaning to the extreme, so that it becomes a state of exception, like exceptional performance. It's a genius performance, something like that. And I don't think that kind of performance is politically effective. It's a bold statement, and I kind of see it from Indonesian point of view, but I'm not sure that that Indonesian point of view is also singular, in a sense that I think it's happened everywhere. However, we found that a collective of performance, a collective of a group of performance sharing a similar ideas, there is something. I think something in a sense that we might have a better option with that. We have a better chance with that. So that's what we kind of think through this past several years. Before going further with this statement, certainly I am affiliating myself in the larger network of artists and cultural producers who think that artistic production is always political, even in their absence of politics, right? To think politically and to propose political choices in performance lies at the core of practices that I am involved with, either as theater maker or merely as a spectator. I feel I create affiliation with that. Having been involved in a collective called Teater Garasi in Yogyakarta for almost 20 years, at this stage I am currently experimenting with the dramaturgy of politics and performance through meditating on how to make our politics sustainable and persistent long after our performance has ended. By thinking through sustainability of political ideas, we find that performance should be located as a part of a larger network of political ideas, a conscious subject of an ongoing discursive formation. And this is just the 2 point of inquiry. It is an inquiry. I think it should be an inquiry, always be an inquiry. Because we never won the game. So we kind of like split it into two area of game, so to speak, if it's a game. The first approach takes place on the front stage, and the second is on the back. This is just to clarify what I'm trying to say. The first approach was informed by Garasi's aesthetic trajectory. So we've been doing this because it's a collective group and we have a lot of artists in it. So every time we have a core work like Waktu Batu in 2001 or Jejalan in 2009, artists who are involved in it, they unintentionally dig deeper to a particular part of that particular project, and then they create their own work. So there is always like an environment in every core production that we have. And lately, we kind of want to put that further, and by make this connection visceral too for the audience, because because if you go deeper to a particular theme, sometimes you kind of lost your track with the originating point, so to speak. So we want to make it more visceral, and I don't know how does it work in a way that I mean, this is a new inquiry. So yeah, this is the part of the picture. We have a full versions of the Yang Fana adalah waktu kita abadi, time is transient, we are eternal on YouTube. If you are not lazy enough, there is 1 hour and 30 minutes with a bad subtitle, but it's good enough. Yeah, and this is a production commenting on the cacophony of post-98 Indonesia. We have a polarity just like everywhere else, and a crisis in public sphere. If we want to simplify the conversation, before 98 it was the citizen versus the state. After 98 it is the citizen versus the citizens, right? Like a horizontal kind of friction. So it creates a lot of noises, and it's a very cacophonic sphere in terms of whenever we talk about the public sphere. So yeah, we are dealing with history, we are dealing with the logic of the family, and then there is this just a simple, a very simplistic idea of creating a ghost out of the performance, because this, on the back here, there is that covered general statue that we never uncovered throughout the production, like a haunting of a military regime in Indonesia. The same statue appear in the other production, theater. This is a musical, theater music of Yanu Ariendra in 2016 called the Menara Ingatan, the Minaret of Memory, which actually deal with a different trajectory of, deal with different theme. He's working with space in a region in Indonesia called Banyuwangi, and the colonial history in Banyuwangi, which is trespass to Indonesian modern history. And the same statue is there. The last project that individually outside of Teater Garasi is Melancholic Beach album called The Norm of the Nucleus Prosperous Happy Family, which is coming from Indonesian New Order family concept, Norma Keluarga Kecil Bahagia Sejahtera. The same statue is also there. This is a very, I mean, a very simple project of creating an environment of constellations of image, but it also traveled to different kind of audience. We don't know what it does actually, because it's very recent. And how does it work, and how does it, we have a lot of conversation around, and people already had a similar, some feedback about that, why it is covered, why it is, I think the strong image of uncovered statue and the ghosting of military regime in Indonesia that is much more apparent in the last 2 or 3 years kind of create the conversation in a different ways. But yeah, this is the kind of thing, the kind of question that we kind of ask. This is, yeah, again, this is an inquiry state, and can we do further than that? Because yeah, because aside of the similar motive, aside of the shared thematic alliance, I think we kind of feel it is very important to create certain kind of environment. Once again, what I mean by environment is probably fleeting and unclear as of now. Yes, but that's what happened on the front stage. On the backstage, our kind of question is, how does performance making in a network of ideas work? on the backstage. What the collective do to each other and to the spectator, and how to create a network of performance production. So we have a participant of Majelis Dramaturgi, one of them is here. We have a accidental working group that is coming out of a workshop, dramaturgy workshop in 2016, consisting of 20-something artists. And we kind of continue this network of dramaturg and artists from Jakarta, Bandung, Yogyakarta, and Madura. So similar to what we have here in Asian Dramaturg Network, but most of them are producer, so to speak, not producer in a producer sense, cultural producer, artistic producer. They are dramaturg, directors. We don't care much about dramaturg, we care about dramaturgy. That's why it's Dramaturgy Assembly Initiative rather than a Dramaturg Assembly Initiative. In 2017, focusing on historiography of performance and performing historiography, the working group kind of have a different reason to gather beside of drinking and getting drunk. And so the Majelis explored the complex structures of, at least in 2017, the complex structures of historiography and representation of history of and in performance. And why history? I think history is one of the core problem in political realm in Indonesia and political discourse in Indonesia. I think it's everywhere. We have a problem with race in the United States because we don't understand the politics of race, right? And the same goes in Indonesia. We have a problem with the rise of Islamic fundamental because we don't understand the history of Islamic teaching in Indonesia. Because there is also who write history, and yeah, it's the Walter Benjamin question about history and so on. It's still there. So yeah, the Majelis then explored the complex structure of historiography and representations of history of and in performance, the crisis of histories in performance between the disembodiment as the preconditions of history and the process of re-embodiment of performing history. We got macro and micro politics, I mean, because they all independently deal with and dwelling on their own particular theme. So we got, yeah, macro and micro politics of embedded ideologies in the performing history. We have a work in progress already taking place. They are all produced independently, so we just a group of people talking. We couldn't help each other that much, beside of talking. This is watching Turang, menonton Turang by Akbar Yumni, who is dealing with the attempt to recreate a spectatorship out of a lost film. The film was made by a communist related director back in the 50s and 60s, and the film was erased from the archive. There is no first data. We don't have the copy of the film at all. We don't have a copy even. There's a rumor that we have a scenario of it, but Akbar couldn't find them out of the movie, so he reconstructed the film from photo publication and film review and stuff like that. The second project that he has is another artist is Dendi Madia, who is working with reenactment of several Teater Garasi production, which is a very influential physical theater group in Indonesia. He just, at this point, he just reenact them. They choosing a certain scene from different performance piece and reenact them. And the third one is a mono project by Ari Duyanto, who claimed who's actually talking about his childhood and the idea of dance history, so to speak, throughout his childhood around schooling system in Indonesia, Michael Jackson and so on, and he claimed it as the brief history of dance. That's the ultimate history of dance. Yeah, but this kind of project, we have Taufik Darwis probably is going to talk about his own project tomorrow, right? Membeli Ingatan, right? Which is part of the conversation too. It's a very, we don't know about politics at this point in a sense that but we can talk more about why sustainability of ideas and sustainability of political sphere for artists seems like a very interesting challenge in Indonesia after this. But yeah, that's it from me. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very exciting work. Okay, I know we've got lots of questions for Goran, but we're going to move on to Yinan. And then after that, we'll end with Zhen.
Hi, everyone. My name is Yinan. I come from China. And I would like to start my talk with a small response to what Charlene and Robin and Honian said this morning about the concept of dramaturgy. And then many of you have wondered what dramaturgs do, or should they exist, should the profession exist? And I'm the one who translated dramaturgy, the German notion of dramaturgy, dramaturgie, into Chinese as 戏剧构作. That was 2009, 9 years ago. And since then, it raised a debate, a heavy debate in China about how to translate the concept. I myself am not so keen about the terminology or dictionary making either. But in the particular political context in China, it is very important to choose a word to present the meaning of dramaturgy. And as I said, there was a heavy debate, and one of my so-called enemy, a professor from the Shanghai Theater Academy, just denounced my translation of dramaturgy into 戏剧构作, and he insists that the word should be translated as 戏剧顾问, as consultant. And in the particular context of China, and it has important meaning between the two translations. And Professor Sun's translation as 戏剧构作 just denounced this profession, and he wrote quite a long article which is published 1 year or 2 years ago to justify his translation. Because in his article he said there's no profession of 戏剧构作, of dramaturg in China, or everyone can be dramaturg in China. And he quoted some examples also in the Cultural Revolution when the model operas were still going on. And he said the Mao Zedong and Jiang Qing, they also give some comment to the great opera, so they can be also dramaturgs. So yeah, for me, someone just come from outside to give suggestions or to limit the creative process, to censor, is not dramaturgs. And dramaturgs is a profession, I think. And dramaturgs play important roles in theater making process. And I think it's very important to train dramaturg and to educate dramaturgs in China to politicalize theater making. And since at least 20 years in China, there's a huge progress going on to depoliticalize theater making. And that's why the reason some people just insist not to include the profession of dramaturgs in China. So that's a short introduction to my talk this afternoon. And yeah, just a little background. I established the first BA study program in dramaturgy in Asia, to my knowledge, 3 years ago in the Central Academy of Drama, and I'm now teaching in the department. And in China, we did alter a little bit what dramaturgy mean in the theater making process, and stress upon the active role, of creative role of dramaturgs in the whole theater making process. And also in our BA program, we combined the so-called applied theater studies. It's not similar with the US or English meaning of applied theater, but more in the German Gießen sense of applied theater studies, of a new method of theater making through devising theater, together with dramaturgy. So the theater program is called BA Study Program in Dramaturgy and Applied Theater Studies, and exists since 3 years. And first, it's just I'm teaching the dramaturgy part, and since half a year, Kai Tuchmann, a German dramaturg, also joined us. So we too are basically teaching some 50 students, dramaturgy students. And I'm now introducing a project we did last year in July last year. It's called Water Margin, 水浒. And it's based from a famous Chinese classical novel, I guess most of you know. 水浒传 is supposed to be written by Shi Nai'an at the end of Yuan dynasty. He lived in the end of 13th century and beginning of 14th century. And the novel is about a peasant uprising in the Song dynasty in the 12th century. And it's a typical story of, in Chinese we call it 官逼民反, oppressed by the officials and the mass revolts against them. So a highly political novel, and which is banned for many times. But it was one of the favorite novel of Mao Zedong, the leader of the Chinese Communist Revolution. And Mao Zedong is supposed to carry the novel all the time in his bag, and also in the process of the Long March. So you can see how dear the novel to him is. And he seems to see many connections with the novel about the peasant uprising in the Song dynasty and the communist revolution, which he was leading. And he also compares sometimes himself and the other communist leaders with the leaders of the peasant uprising, such as Song Jiang and Chao Gai. And in the year 1975, 1 year before his death, Mao Zedong raised a countrywide huge campaign against the novel of 水浒传. Because at the end of the novel, the leader of the peasant uprising did capitulate to the court, and which led to the failure of the whole uprising. And in the year, that's the end of the Chinese long revolution, because in China, in the 20th century, the revolution starts with 1911, 辛亥革命, until the end of the Cultural Revolution, which is 1976. So it's a long revolution within the short century, so-called. And at the end of his life and at the end of the whole revolution, Mao Zedong did see the danger of capitulation. He see some, he called the cadres, the reactionary cadres, would, after his death, to capitulate to the old system, to the old order system, to feudalism and capitalism. And after his death, Deng Xiaoping took over, and especially after 1989, the present situation is that there is a new elite class in China, the upper class, which is made of the officials and the rich ones. So there's a huge gap between the poor and the rich, and between the upper class and the lower class. So did we return after a long revolution to the starting point? What is the present China? What is the link between the present China and the time before revolution? And what will the Chinese future be in the big slogan of the Chinese dream, etc.? So that's the questions we raise through this project. It's a 1 year long project that I led the whole 25 students of the BA dramaturgy program to do. And also, together with two other mentors, Peng Tao, who is the chair of our department, and Kai Tuchman, who took over the role of the dramaturg. But basically, we three were just mentors. And we led a group of 25 students. And at first, I just led the workshops, the devising theater workshops, to help the students to develop the text and the performance at the same time. It's a long process of rehearsing and of research, of reading books together. We read different versions of Shui Hu Zhuan, the novel, and different versions in the Chinese music theater. There's a lot of operas, local operas, or the narrative literature about the same story. And also there's a TV series in the recent years in China, twice in China, and I heard also here in Japan in the 70s, there's a TV series of Shui Hu Zhuan going on. And we studied the novel as a document in the whole process of Chinese history. It's 700 years history of China, and especially in the long history of Chinese Revolution. And finally, we decided to concentrate on chapter 39 of the novel. It recounts a story of Li Kui. Li Kui is one of the underdogs, so-called underdogs, who tried to save his big brother, 哥哥, Song Jiang. Song Jiang just through an injustice, he was sentenced to death. And before the execution, Li Kui and other heroes from Liangshan just rescued him. But by achieving the justice, they just put a lot of injustice to innocent people by butchering just around blindly. A lot of innocent lives just was lost. So we concentrate on this chapter, and the 25 students were divided in 5 groups. And at the end of the first semester, which is December 2016, and each group present their own scene fragments. And in the second semester, Kai Tuchman led the workshop of text collage. He taught the students how to make collage from different texts, also from news nowadays, to combine the present situation with the old materials. So we finally made the production on July the 1st last year on our campus. So as you can see, the scene starts with a prelude, and the audience were located in the second floor, and they look upon the first floor, which seems like a retrospective perspective to the history or to the world, because in our opinion, the world has the similar order as the pre-revolution eras. So we saw 2 girls are playing cards, and they're wearing different masks. Perhaps you can see there's a mask of Stalin, and the other is Churchill. And now there's one is, can you recognize that? Yeah, one's Putin, and the other is, no. It's Trump. Yeah, it's right, present day. And we also invited workers in our academy who work for the canteen and for the student dormitory to read the speech texts of Xi Jinping and Obama. And in Xi Jinping's speech and in Obama's speech, they're talking about the country's blooming, the flourish, but the blooming and flourish has nothing to do with common people's everyday life. So that's basically the prelude. And then we have the revolution. Revolution is depicted as a carnival, and the actors just inviting the audience to join them. And among them also, there's Clemens Treter, he's the leader of the Goethe Institute in Beijing. He was also invited to join the Revolution Carnival. And everyone here are dancing and to the loud music and celebrating the revolution. And that's the second scene. And in the same place, the people are located now in the first floor, and they see 4 actors on the second floor. And the 4 actors are recounting the story of the 39th chapter, but they are playing, they're exchanging roles frequently. And the one who has the role just put a huge dunce cap, a large paper cap, which is used in the Cultural Revolution to denounce the so-called reactionaries. And that's the third part, guide. Also, she's wearing a mask of a Peking Opera rebel. He's leading the whole audience group through the campus. It's like a long march. It's a quite long march, actually. It took half an hour. But after the exhausting march, they just return to the original location. So because Peng Tao, who is the chair of our department, he's also the chair of the party secretary of our department party committee. And some audience member just interpret this section of the performance as we follow the party and we just return to our original location. Yeah, and this is the fourth part, which is located in the 4th floor. It's a corridor, long corridor made of glass. So it's July, it's very hot, so it's overheated, and it was a very humid and hot night. And the actors just present a dumpling making scene, but the dumpling is made of human flesh, of human meat. Yeah, it's one of the story of the Shuihu, of the water margin, of Sun Ernyang, but it's also a famous metaphor of Lu Xun, people eating people. It's just a depiction of the Chinese society, feudalism society. And then we go to, it's a long corridor, just underground corridor behind our canteen. And we did not know, but through our investigation on campus, we know that in this basement, the workers, the canteen workers, all live in the small rooms in this underground basement, and the rooms are without windows. So it's a scene about the underclass of the society. And then there's a scene which is in a free air theater on our campus, but the whole action just took place on the auditorium where the audience members sit. And each member wear a safety helmet. It might be interpreted as a symbol of everyone is in danger, is in this story of this rebellion. Yeah, and this is the final scene and of reflection, which took place as the same location as the prelude. And yeah, it ends with a quote of Walter Benjamin. And I would like to read it to you. It's from his thesis of philosophy of history. Walter Benjamin says, "The class struggle, which is always present to a historian influenced by Marx, is a fight for the crude and material things, without which no refined and spiritual things could exist. Nevertheless, it is not in the form of the spoils which fall to the victor that the latter made their presence felt in the class struggle. They manifest themselves in this struggle as courage, humor, cunning, and fortitude. They have retroactive force and will constantly call in question every victory, past and present, of the rulers. As flowers turn towards the sun, by dint of a secret heliotropism, the past strive to turn toward that sun which is rising in the sky of history. A historical materialist must be aware of this most inconspicuous of all transformations." So you see the sun, it's people, all the audience members can see it's a basin, it's a foot wash basin, dragged by 2 girls on the 2nd floor. Yeah, it's the raw material. Yeah, thank you all.
Thank you, Yinan. Thank you very much for that. Right. Our final speaker today is TZU NYEN. If you would just give us a few minutes to set the presentation up.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is TZU NYEN. I'm just gonna give a quick sort of introduction to what I do, and then I will speak a little bit about this project, which is up here, which is a website actually. So I am primarily a visual artist. So I'm not quite sure how I wandered into the performing arts, but many of the terms and terminologies and concepts that you know one encounters in such meetings are a little bit foreign for me, because I've never had any kind of training in this discipline. So over the years, I've also tried to kind of engage and learn a little bit, but at the same time, I always feel a little bit of a foreigner or a stranger, you know. So just even the concepts of dramaturgy, you know, it's still something that I'm kind of grappling with a little bit. So today I was actually planning to speak about the most recent work that I've done, which is actually present here at the TPAM at CAT. And I was resisting showing images of that work because some of you might not have seen it yet, and it feels strange to kind of like show pictures of the work that you are about to see. So I thought maybe a good challenge is to speak about the work without showing images, which is highly unusual for me. Usually I rely on a lot of images to get out of talking so much. But today I will try to describe the work, and maybe we have to kind of imagine it a little bit. And I will end off with talking about another project, which is this website over here. So just even the work that I will first speak about, it's called One or Several Tigers. So it's actually, in fact, an installation which was first, which premiered. I mean, even the term premiere isn't something we use in the visual arts, but it premiered in Berlin at the House of World Cultures in May. So just to describe physically what the work entails, it's a room with two screens. On one side of the screen, we see a man, and on the other side of the screen, it's dominated predominantly by a tiger. And the man and the tiger are singing a duet. And this duet, I would say, at least my intentions for the duet was that it condenses a million or more years of human-tiger relationships in the Malayan world. A lot of the questions and conversations I've had over the last few days was about these two screens. You know, it's like I had questions as to why the work didn't put the two screens next to each other, which would maybe dramaturgically make it easier for us to access, to see both screens. So maybe I will start by just kind of like talking about these two screens, and maybe hopefully we find a way to kind of return back to the topic, which is dramaturgy and I guess politics. So maybe I should also start a little bit by just giving you a sense of what the work in the contents of the work. So tigers have always been prevalent in Singapore up till the period of colonization by the British. So maybe I should also return further back to the name Singapore itself. So some of you might know that Singapore in Sanskrit, Singapura, actually means lion city. But of course, there are no lions in Singapore or in the region of Southeast Asia. But what we did have a lot of were tigers. So in a way, choosing the tiger as a motif to think history is perhaps a dream of another version of how history can be written. So tigers first actually dispersed across Southeast Asia when Southeast Asia was linked as one landmass, which is called the Sunda Shelf. So after sea levels rose, that's when Southeast Asia kind of like split apart. And but tigers have already been dispersed in that region prior to that. And tigers like to live in the zone between the waters and the forest. So contrary to our popular kind of like idea, we always think that a tiger lives in a forest, but actually it prefers to live at the edge of the forest, because when in a dense tropical forest, you don't have mammals of enough biomass that can sustain, the appetites of the tiger. So when the first, this was more than 1 million years ago, so that was before Homo sapiens even emerged. So when the first humans spread across Southeast Asia, actually the preferred zone of habitats was that same area between the waters and the forest. So I think humans and tigers had lived in a close proximity, and this gave rise in turn to a cosmology in which tigers kind of played a crucial role in many of these traditional societies. So kind of in the Malayan world, tigers are kind of known as mediums or vehicles for ancestral spirits. So there is also a habit of never referring to the tiger by its proper name, because that's kind of like bad luck. You refer to the tiger through a series of other terms like which means like grandfather or uncle, and they are all kinship terms, which is kind of interesting because that's kind of a close. It means that tigers are not the other, but there is a kind of ambiguous relationship to humans. But all of these myths, I would say today in Singapore, it's gradually being erased. And these myths are also erased with the destruction of the forest and the extinction of tigers. And the annihilation of tigers in Singapore was a result of colonization. And I would say that tigers, in fact, were kind of one of the big, severe victims of that period of history. So I've been researching on these different, stories, mythologies, and histories of humans and tigers in the last 7 or 8 years. So I produced a number of different projects. I did a work in 2014, which was called 10,000 Tigers, which is as close as I got to doing a real theater piece. And what the piece that we are seeing here at TPAM came after that, and it's kind of an installation, right? So that's kind of the background. So now I will return back to the question of the two screens. So the main problem, kind of the main topic of conversation I've had with some friends was why it was so difficult, why I created the piece in such a way that it's kind of difficult to look at, because there are things happening simultaneously on both screens at any one time. And a lot of these comments came from people who are working in the performative field. And this has actually, for me, never been a question up to now. This figure, just to give a little bit of context as well, the human in one of these screens was based on an actual figure called George Dromgold Coleman, who was an Irish surveyor working for the British. And in 1835, he led a road survey in a forested area of Singapore, and a tiger leaped out at the survey team, and the tiger didn't kill anyone. What it did do was to destroy an instrument called the theodolites, which is used for triangulation. So this was made into a lithographic print by a German artist in 1865, and my work draws very heavily from this image. So in this image, we have the tiger emerging sort of from the right side of the frame, and we have the white surveyor sort of falling back to the left, and this instrument or machine is sort of suspended in the middle. So when I was thinking about this installation, it was, for me, almost a logical necessity that the tiger and the man has to be positioned in this confrontational configuration, you know. So what do I think of the audience presence in it? Like, how does the audience watch both screens at the same time? I basically, you know, for me, it was that the audience has to choose, like, which side to look at, and that this, what we are missing is constantly part of the experience. It might not be part of the narrative, but it's kind of part of the experience of encountering the work. But I would also kind of perhaps push this a little bit further, which is to say that for me, the work was not made for humans, that the tiger and the man are in fact singing this duet to each other, and that the human presence is secondary. So I think of the work as an object, you know, that it's a self kind of enclosed loop, which is, you know, complete in itself. And of course, I'm aware that, you know, this is a work of art, and spectators have to see this. And for me, what humans are actually observing is the act of the tiger or the man observing each other. So if I'm to borrow a term maybe from cybernetics, it's like a second order observation. We observe an act of observation. And, you know, so this has been kind of on my mind in the last few days, and I was thinking maybe this has something in a way to do with still sort of a difference in approach. In theater, we are used mainly to kind of watching something, you know, in full. You know, we have the comfort or the idea that we can master the visual field, that we have to follow the narrative. A narrative is paced in such a way that the audience is kind of constantly, you know, led through with a thread, you know. Whereas for me, this confrontational configuration is a kind of exclusion of the human in that immediate level. And at the same time, as I said, the work deals with more than 1 million years of history, and it's condensed into the work, which is exactly 33 minutes and 33 seconds long. So which is also to say that the information is extremely dense. And I never imagined that there would be a human spectator who is able to follow every bit of the exchange. So even the narrative and the spoken text, I would say, is, you know, the tiger, it's in a sense a certain kind of ritual that the tiger and the man performs between themselves. Yeah. So now I would just kind of try to inch a little bit towards the politics, which was kind of part of this seminar. So I wrote to them a few days, to Robin a few days ago. I would say that I feel uncomfortable framing my work as politics, even though I respect and have high regard for people who do this, but it's kind of not really in the vocabulary of my system in thinking about the work. But of course, through the histories of humans and tigers, it opens up to all kinds of political, ecological questions, the annihilation of tigers. And today we are very conscious of sort of the planetary crisis that we are in. So for me, history, very often we have works, we deal with history only through the perspective of the human. But I thought, with this particular work, it could be interesting to kind of think about history through the figure of the tiger. And in the Malayan world, the lines between man and tiger, in the pre-colonial times, maybe the division between men and tigers, between culture and nature, is not actually that distinct, since the tiger is a kin, it's like a relative. And there are many myths of human and tiger metamorphosis, or were-tigers. So shamans could kind of like transform into tigers. We see this, for example, in Apichatpong Weerasethakul's excellent film, Tropical Melody. Yeah. So that's kind of like my approach, I guess, as close as I can kind of bring to thinking politics. But I would like to now return to the lithograph, the original lithograph of the man and the tiger sort of confronting each other during the survey mission. I think when we first look at the photograph, the lithograph, what we are immediately drawn to is this dichotomy between Malayan tiger and a white surveyor who was also kind of very conveniently dressed in white. So you kind of see this distinction. And we very often don't look at the rest of the figures. They are kind of disposable. So in the earlier theatrical piece that I did called 10,000 Tigers, this lithograph emerged as well, but I was mainly focusing on this binary clash between the Western surveyor. And the surveyor is a master of, the work of survey is to master space, is to grid space, is to control, to transform space into a set of mathematical coordinates. Whereas the tiger, on the other hand, would represent this wild animality or the force of chaos. With this particular work, one or several tigers here at TPAM, my main focus was in looking at the rest of the figures who have been scattered around the surveyor and the tiger. And so I started kind of researching on who these figures actually were. So this image was done by a German artist in the 19th century who's never been to Malaya. So the representation is not the most accurate. But according to historical accounts, these figures that are scattered around were actually Indian prisoners. So this was at a time when the British abolished slavery, but to replace the labor force that slavery was generating, they started a system of using indentured labor, meaning that they were people who were actually mostly South Indians who were sentenced to prisons. They have a special sentence called transportation, in which they are transported to different British colonies, and then they basically became this source of cheap labor. Actually, this in the end worked out much better for the British because sailing to the Africa continent and raiding for slaves was extremely costly. So this group that was accompanying the road survey mission were actually these Indian prisoners. So I started also kind of investigating into the history of this penal system. So the road surveyor, whose name is Coleman, very interestingly in Singapore, his official title was Superintendent of Public Works. So other than doing the road surveys, he was the chief architect and probably the first urban planner in Singapore. But at the same time, he was also the superintendent of prisoners. And these two roles have been conflated always in the early British colonial system. So Coleman's successor was like an engineer who was also the in charge of the prisons. So whoever was actually in charge of building public works and designing, the urban fabric of early Singapore was always in charge of the prison for obvious reasons, because these were the people who built all of these public works. And the penal system in Singapore at that time was known as the most progressive in the British system. They had an ideal of creating a prison that no longer had to even employ warders. So prisoners were encouraged to survey each other and to report on each other. So the British, being great kind of pragmatic, business people, this was a great cost-saving device. So that kind of got me, very interested in this model. So in order for me to create figural representations of these Indian convict laborers. By the way, I forgot to mention that the work was mostly digital animation, which is kind of an important fact to mention. So for me to create 3D images of these Indian workers, I decided then to cast contemporary migrant workers in Singapore. These days, the majority of our migrant workers involved in construction are from the Bangladesh rather than from India. So I casted some of these, 8 of these migrant workers from an area in Singapore called Little India. And then I invited them into the project. So the original prints from which I'm drawing all of these references from is now in the National Gallery of Singapore, which is actually at the heart of the old colonial part of Singapore. And one of the main entrances into the museum is known as Coleman Street. So it was actually named after the road surveyor. And the National Gallery itself was actually, it was an old colonial building, and it was rebuilt recently to transform it into the National Gallery of Singapore. And in the process of the construction, which took years, actually there were quite a few casualties, fatal casualties for these migrant construction workers. And these migrant construction workers, most of us know of the conditions in which they work and live, which is that they are paid very minimal wages. A lot of them don't have access to their passports. It's kept by the company, by the middleman. A lot of them come to Singapore through a loan, and they have to work a long time to pay off even their loan. And often when they get injured, that's kind of when problems appear, because they might not be able to, pay back their loans. So as I was working on this, it started dawning on me that perhaps from the early period of the British colonization, when these workers were kind of indentured, labor, prison laborers, to now, it is not so much, perhaps there is a certain kind of continuity in the system of how Singapore is continuing to build itself. So that's, then I thought it was also interesting for me to have, to bring these 8 workers, actors that I was working with to the National Gallery and to film in the National Gallery and to film them looking at these prints and to speak about why I'm doing this work and some of the ideas behind it. So I don't know if this kind of fits into the politics side of the panel. So just in ending very quickly, I wanted to talk about this, but I guess I kind of ran out of time, which is also fine. But this, just to take like 10 seconds, or 50 seconds, yeah. This project is called the Critical Dictionary of Southeast Asia, and it's basically a set of algorithms which is editing a film endlessly based on 26 ideas I have kind of like about Southeast Asia. And one of the terms from A to Z, right? Like under T, we have T for tigers. So all of my kind of like research on tigers kind of, and all the work on tigers is part of this larger project. I just suddenly thought I wanted to show this websites because earlier we were talking about spreading this network of ideas, on the stage and behind the stage. So, when I was doing this website, I also thought that it's interesting that this is not kind of like in a white cube or black box, but that this was something that was kind of readily available and kind of reference points for all of the questions and research topics that I was interested in. Yeah. So I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Zunian. We have about 30 minutes to take questions. Very happy again. We are documenting this. If you have a question, please raise your hand so that my colleagues can pass you a mic for clear audio capture. Any questions? If you want to ask a question in Japanese, our panelists have access to the interpreter, so that's not a problem. Well, as the provocateur, I'll start. I'm going to start with JAE Lee. I've got a few questions for you. I think, one, I'm going to ask, kind of question you about your position as a Korean doing a project. I think then I think the question can again be extended to UGORAN and to YINAN, and to a certain extent to Nyen. You being Korean, talking about this particular episode, the whole idea of institutions, about the political questions, can you do it without being personal and subjective? Or as a dramaturg, is that part of the strength? That means that it is an advantage that you're Korean talking about Korean history, rather than say, like for example, if we had a German dramaturg going in, giving an outsider perspective, since we talked about the inside and the outside. So can you tell us a little bit about how your process was?
I think I'm not in charge of the representative the Korean dramaturgy. This work is related to the Korean history or Korean context, but my main focus on the how do we make art, yeah? So my strategy and my focusing is always depends on the choreographers or the process of the choreography. So this one is particularly have some, I this one is kind of related to the political question. It's kind of the political situation in the context of Korea. So I've just decided to present this kind of project. But I'm a pretty young dramaturg in the Korea, and then I'm from the contemporary dance scene, and so I'm pretty much think about the kind of the way it's influenced from the Western, I think. So I just made up the kind of the choreographic documentary where just we saw the glory is kind of lecture performance like. It's from all the Western, so I'm not sure it's related to the Korean context or just personally, and then my interest in about all the choreographic the process. So.
Thank you. Yes. Can you wait for the mic? Thank you so much for waiting.
Okay, so I want to start with something which JAE Lee, you said, which was that one of the objectives of the work was to make the power structure visible, that this in itself was a political act. And in a way, I want to then look at what YINAN, you were saying about the water margin. I grew up with the 70s version, so I have quite a warmth to the whole story. And that's in a way, making the power structure visible is a political act, and often the power structure does not want to be made visible. And so was it possible to make clear both this attempt to stage the power structure, because I saw there was the party secretary was visible as the party secretary, the canteen workers were visible as canteen workers, etc. So the real power structure and status within society is fictionalized within the show. Was it possible, because there will be limits then to how much you can show that structure, I suppose. Was it possible to make both the visibility and the invisibility readable to the audience?
I'm not sure to understand all your question, but as an artist, also as a dramaturg, we're just talking about the choreographic process, and then we just thinking about how can we make our art, and the process was we just unfold every element, like implicit elements of a structure of the society, and then we just look around all the material. It's not, I use the material is not only the jargon of the performance or the dance, just a lot of elements, the factor of the society, and then we just pick that up. And then we give some order or composition, or sometimes a constellation. And sometimes this is very obvious on the stage. At the same time, sometimes very it's the bizarre composition is from, we didn't get any idea from this. The metaphorical kind of elements, and then it's very obvious material is all together, and then very messy on the stage, I think. So it depends on the choreographer intention, or the dancer's characters, or sometimes we just kind of experimentally the making of some art choreography. So, yeah.
Yeah, for me, dramaturgy is just to make the invisible visible. It's, for me, the major function of dramaturgy. And authoritarians like to have secrets. If you keep everything secretly, so you can make your decision without consulting, without talking about without making any explanation. But dramaturgs just make all the secrets just visible so that we can discuss. So I think in the Chinese context, it's a very useful tool for democracy. It's just as a tool against the authoritarians.
Yes, please. The mic's
Hello, my name is Linda. I just want to share the context of the political art in Yogyakarta, as I understand, and we have been discussing in our study group in Yogyakarta as well. I'm happy that we are talking about this kind of things again in this space, but somehow I feel that when we're talking about the political arts or art and society is like an opposite. This is art and that's society, and then we against each other, the problems, those kind of things. But in reality, I and my several friends are questioning, what is it? Is it contextual to perceiving the political art like that? Because we found that there is several practice already happens and is still going on now. For example, like we think that in art itself, we are structuring structures. With this, there are also power relations and contestations and whatever games on it. And we also face those kind of things in both in my practice in visual art and also in dancing. And some of the artists and some of the agency, we call it agency, also addressing the institutional critics, not only to the political stage, whatever, but also in the art system itself. And we also perceive it that is also political art. And the other hand, somehow I feel that art is not only owned by us, the people working in the art scenes, but it's a democratic space when the peoples also can engage with their own context. For example, like in Yogyakarta, we are facing the problems of the line right issues, and people's who's not coming from the art field, working together with the artists, and then they're initiating some movements, performative activity as a resistance. You know, so how then we recontextualize the definitions of the political art when we have this kind of reality? So I'm just trying to provoke all of us to see the broader context of these things, you know. So we are not tracking only in a frames that art, and then that's the political things, and then we have to face that. We also have political problems in our art systems, for example. So, yeah, that's my comments and idea.
Thank you very much for that. Any other questions? Yes, there's one over there.
Hi, my name is Virkin. I'm from India. Actually, sort of going ahead from what Linda also said is one of the questions I wanted to ask everybody was this: there's certain processes that you utilize with research while you're creating what you do, but how much of that is also translated to how it gets read by somebody who watches it? And does that is the intention of making what, I don't quite like the word political art because I think it's a bit problematic, but in the politics of what you're trying to say, is there an intention where it's an initiation for discussion, it's in the larger realm of things? Is it also to say that it is sort of a starting point to, I sometimes imagine that when you're using art as a tool, as a medium to be able to say something, it's something that you can't otherwise do. It's not something that you watch on television that somebody is resisting every day. But I understand that if one is making or using the body, for example, as a tool for resistance, it's doing so in a manner which you may not be able to see otherwise. And that's why you're using this particular medium. Otherwise, I can talk about it, I can write about it, I can draw, I can do many other things. But one chooses as a medium of dance or movement or theater or the body, essentially, as that act. And what does that mean? how much of it gets translated in me being able to read it, for example, between the tiger and the man. There's so much that you talked right now about the context of it, and it was very well understood. And it sort of made sense. Now, if I was to go watch it, I would really sort of go much deeper into what that would mean to me. But is that something that you intended in the way you either presented it or how it was presented? Of how much of that does just a general person without that context get, and if it's necessary at all?
Thank you. Goran, you want to start? How much of your research is put out there in the art that you create, and how much of that will be picked up? Or do you ever take that into consideration in terms of the reception part, that how much of it that they will get?
Yeah, we can make effort like creating discussion and everything, but it's at the end of the day, it's politically it's also problematic, like a feeding spoon to the audience, thinking that they are not smart enough getting our conversation, but also at the same time, I think the whole conversation, especially about political relevancy, is much, at least subjectively right now, is what moves us, right? Like that's the, and having, I think also addressing Linda's mapping about the land reform problem in Yogyakarta, which we share the same city and we share similar network, Kunci and, Cemeti and Garasi work in the same network. So yeah, there is that. Okay, you get the conversation, you know what we are talking about, and what about doing something about that, right? Like, and that's not happening. Like, for instance, the rise of the rise of fundamentalism everywhere, for instance, right? Like, so theater actually cannot do anything, or performance cannot do anything, because avant-garde theater is always everywhere, in as much as you like, but who's watching performance and who's watching theater is precisely the problem. I think in Indonesia we have this strong phrase we call it kelas menengah ngehe, which is in I don't know, in bullshit middle class, like fucked up middle class, if I forget my speech. Yeah, but there is that the middle class who live in a bubble, who actually attend our performance, and we are also part of middle class, and our conversation doesn't go anywhere. I think there is that, like, because this is precisely because the enemy, so to speak, in terms of thinking about the citizen classes in Indonesia right now, they are doing the labor. They are really, really doing the labor. Organization, creating a ritual, creating a conversation. If there is a fire happening in Jakarta, they are the first. They, meaning what? Us and them is very political, but forgive me. Yeah, but there is this hardline group who are going to be there, the first one who's attending any environmental crisis or any hurricane, any flooding. They are the one who's going to be there. And the critical one, the one who's leaning to the left, middle to the left, they are the lazy one. They don't go anywhere. They don't go anywhere. They're going to theater. They're going to dance, but they're not going to this. So there is this: who's calling and who's answering the call for a political crisis? Are we creating an environmental safe enough to talk about politics and thinking that we are critical enough, but actually at the same time we are. That's the extent of our political commitment, right? And this is I think that's the trouble in doing this, knowing that there's this circle of producing and consuming that we kind of like in many ways perpetuate. It's troubling, and this is precisely what the land reform is. Another case, a new case in Indonesia. We got 37. Family who is almost being eradicated by the new plan of creating a new airport in Yogyakarta, because the old airport is very problematic. It raises environmental problem, traffic and everything. So all middle class in Yogyakarta clapping for the idea of having a new airport in Yogyakarta. We got 37 who are almost being forced from their home right now. And Jogja in general doesn't speak anything. Like we have a lot of artistic project around it, political project around it, movement around it. There is a strong 37 musical group, pop-ish indie independent project, which my band was involved as one of them. We create a bi-weekly music release, single release from this wide populations of indie project from not only Yogyakarta but also Jakarta and Bali, because forced eviction is everywhere in Indonesia right now because of the infrastructural development. But it never take place at the center of mass conversation. It never taking place as a citizen conversation. Like in comparison to, say, for instance, the rise against Chinese governor in Jakarta back in 2016, which is 700,000 people marching in Jakarta. They are doing performance. They are totally doing performance, but they are in the same costume, the white and with the like the Arabic is everywhere, and they're totally performative. They're very performative. They even have the same motorcycle, and the noise is the same. They're much more advanced than the artists claiming performative strategy, and they're winning the game. Like 700 people marching on the street, and then a couple of months later, they jailed our Chinese governor, which is Ahok right now in jail for 2.5 years because of blasphemy. So yeah, there is this how to think of performance and how to think of theater, how to think of the significance of art within the art scene. Then so Linda is precisely correct. Like what is the political border of our political situation, like the political situations of the discipline, so to speak, the political situations of performance, of theater, of visual art, and what is the limit of that political scene, very political scene, right, who's the hierarchy within that particular discipline, and then what is the significance of that discipline within the larger sphere of political realm, the crisis of the everyday crisis. This is a hardest part, and at the same time, if you go to other groups such as FPI, and they're all very performative. They're easily being non-artist, being non-dramaturg. They dramaturg themselves really well, like because it's fascist performance, right? Fascist performance is very prescriptive, very formulaic. The dramaturgy of fascist performance is easily easily copied, easily duplicated, easily perpetuated and circulated. It's all about same color, same uniform, same noise, same voice, sameness, right? It's about sameness, and on the middle to left, so to speak, everything is about individuation. It's about particularity. It's about uniqueness. So yeah. So the question is, what is our 21st century assembly, so to speak? If every institution we kind of question, if every institution must fall, if God is dead, so what is our new way of conversing, right? That's the issue, I think.
The research into, I mean, I know you have not conceived of your work as inherently political, but again, the reception of it, and of course, but I think the question is that the research that you've done, and then the things that you've uncovered, the kind of like the expose that what you thought was a white man was actually indentured slavery and all that. So how much of that research, obviously it goes into the work that you've done, but how much of that actually communicates, you know? And I agree with Angaro, is that if we want it to be political, we want diversity, we certainly cannot tell them this is how you should think, because that's exactly what we're telling to people to resist. We don't, a political art has the double bind, is that I want you to understand the oppression out there, but I cannot tell you what to think, right? So again, it has that paradox and that double bind. So in the work that you do, specifically to this one, you know, how much of the research translate into the reception?
So for me, you know, sort of the core, I think of the core of what I do as actually the research. Like the works that are generated out from it are just interfaces with different groups of audience. This began with like the very first project that I did in 2003, which was a film and an installation, which I then kind of packaged as a lecture that I could deliver to schools as a history lesson, and which eventually found its way into the theater, and which is kind of, you know, how I started engaging with the performing arts. So for me, actually, the core, you know, that's, for me, is what I am truly interested in. And these manifestations as installation, performance, I mean, of course, I try to take each presentation and discipline seriously, and I try to think a little bit about the history and specificity of what I do. But these are just ways for me to circulate some of these ideas. So, which is why I wanted to, you know, show the website, because that's like another a dissemination of like these ideas. And in the website, other than these terms, like a lot of my writings that were previously published in journals or magazines, you know, about the tiger, but also about a series of other parts of the dictionary, they were all kind of like included. So I also started thinking about tigers more concretely because I published an essay in a journal about the history of large cats in Singapore. So for me, it's just this kind of like a dissemination or attempt to deal with like, because Singapore at the time when I started my practice, I mean, Singapore is still very small. I was going to say Singapore used to be very small, but it's still very small. But actually the audience size for like, you know, like a contemporary art exhibition is very limited. So for me, it's constantly thinking of ways of engaging and circulating the ideas. But when it comes to this particular piece of work, for me, a visual arts work exists in a different kind of economy than a performing arts work. It also exists to me in a different kind of time frame. It doesn't exist in the same kind of time. Like we always hope that the work is collected, let's say, by a museum, not just for the money, but also that, you know, the work persists, like in time, and you have this hope or the delusion or the illusion that it could be kind of reactivated again. You know, there is not this pressure of delivering it like in the life unfolding of an event. So which is, so when it comes to audience, you know, like how much they can kind of unpack, I think you have to leave it to the audience, like how much he or she really wants. If he or she really wants to kind of track down like some of these supplementary forms, you know, it's easy to do that now also, like with like the internet and, you know, the essays that were kind of published. So I think of what I do as this kind of network of like different small little activities.
JAE LEE?
It's always challenging to have the present the political question through the medium of the dance. The dance is not the main concern in society, and nobody cares about dance and what it's talking about. But after the glory performance, and then during the performance, during the process, we really want to encourage the audience thinking about the body. how precarious the subject is, and then the relationship between the institution and the body. But after the show, just the people just came to me and then, you are not allowed to talking about the military service because you're a woman. So the finalists, they come up with the gender issues, which is political question too, but they don't care about the dance or all the performance thing. Just the theme of the military service is very kind of very sensitive and problematic in Korea society. So it's very challenging for me in the dance society in the Korea. And then, but the contemporary dance, the political question is a part of the contemporary dance. And then I still explore the possibility to how can I address the political question through the medium of the dance. So yeah, it's challenging, but there are many possibilities still there because nobody cares about it. So I can play with all these things, and then the art is more diverse and then comprehensive rather than just demonstrating in the square and then the communal voice and making. So I'm just expect the possibility to share the important issue in society through the dance medium. So, yeah.
Before I let Yinan share with us her thoughts on the question, I also wanted to share with you that just after her presentation, she told me that particular performance itself with invited guests was actually quite dangerous, a dangerous thing to do. So, and that, of course, has really high stakes, other than just, oh, I'm just adapting a chapter from a Chinese literary classic. Yeah, it's just going to contextualize the element of risks involved. So I'm going to let Yinan talk about and to engage that question.
Okay. Yeah, it was a very special case. And our first goal of this project is education. It's a 1-year process. So we might say a process is more important than a result. So the performance itself is just shown one time on one evening. And for that evening, it was really a hard endeavor to realize that. And all the audience members are invited. And there were just limited 50 people were invited, and that's our guests. And it was shown in campus. That's our regulation of our academy. We cannot do student project outside of the campus. But inside the campus, we have to go through a 10-member committee of censorship, which is really hard. So that's part of the reason we decided not to show that in theater. We have about 10 theaters on our new campus. We do not use them so that to avoid the whole censorship procedure. But I think, for me, the project is quite successful in one way that the students really had fun with it. And they think through the 1 year they learned a lot. And also it's a hard process because 25 members of students, each of them are grown-ups, each of them are in their rebellious age, and they try to fight with Peng Tao, with me, and with Kai, with their original ideas. And it was not quite easy to realize the whole project. But I see all the hardships as quite creative and quite productive. And through the debates among the students and also among the three mentors, we achieved perhaps our goal of a dramaturgy course. It's this seminar is called. And also the 50 audience, they stayed after the show and had a very active discussion with the students. So I think we just achieved our goal.
Right, we have just run out of time. Can we? Yeah, all right, so thank you very, very much. Can you please thank my lovely panelists for me? And I think just a closing note that one of the things I've always fascinated about art, for me, of any medium,
is the opportunity for us to talk. And I think that's always very important. In 4:30 is the next session. So, Ling, do you want to? Yeah.
Thank you, panelists, and thank you, Robin. Thanks for all of you staying here. We have a last session for today at 4:30. The title of that panel is Social Change, Action in Japanese Dramaturgy. We have Ken Takiguchi, Kaku-san, Masashi-san, and Puitin. So if you can, have a coffee break, toilet break, and we'll see you back here at 4:30 for the last session. Thank you. And if you would like to be on our mailing list, we have volunteers from TPAM here handing out some feedback form where you can leave us your comments as well as your email addresses. Thank you.